The ride doesn't begin with an announcement. There's no warning, no countdown, no chance to prepare. Most death row inmates don't know they're being moved until the cell door opens. Sometimes it's early morning. Sometimes it's still dark. Sometimes it's a day that feels exactly like every other day before it. A name is called. Orders are short. Restraints come out immediately. And just like that, routine is gone. No one explains where they're going. No one tells them how long the ride will be. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. When the order is given, every death row transfer in Texas begins the same way. Quietly. There is no announcement broadcast through the unit. No warning posted on a board. No conversation with the inmate explaining what is about to happen. The decision to move a death row prisoner is made far away from the cell, inside administrative offices, classification apartments, and security command structures that never have to look the inmate in the eye. By the time the order reaches the housing unit, the outcome is already locked in. For the prisoner, nothing feels different that day. The routine looks the same. The cell feels the same. The silence behaves the same. That sameness is intentional. Texas death row facilities are built around predictability. The environment rarely changes because change invites questions, and questions invite resistance. When days blur together, the mind stops anticipating disruption. That makes sudden action far more effective. The paperwork that authorizes a transfer often carries neutral language. It doesn't say extraction or forced movement. It uses terms like transport, relocation, or administrative transfer. On paper, it looks procedural, controlled, routine. But behind those words is one of the most tightly regulated movements in the American prison system. Only a small number of people are informed in advance. Supervisors, transportation coordinators, extraction team leaders, command staff, line officers inside the unit may not know until moments before it happens. Medical staff are notified only when required. Even then, details are limited. The less people know, the fewer variables exist. And variables are the enemy of control. For the inmate, awareness is deliberately delayed until the last possible moment. Not because officials fear violence. Death row prisoners are already heavily controlled, but because foreknowledge changes psychology. A prisoner who knows they will be moved begins to plan. They rehearse scenarios. They brace emotionally. They attempt to regain a sense of control through anticipation. The system is designed to prevent that. So the order stays invisible until it becomes unavoidable. When the cell door finally opens, it doesn't feel like a decision has just been made. It feels like a rule has suddenly activated. The inmate is told to step forward. Hands are ordered behind the back. Compliance is expected immediately. There is no explanation of destination. Not knowing where they're going is not an oversight. It is policy. In Texas death row operations, uncertainty is treated as a stabilizing force. When the mind lacks information, it narrows its focus to the present moment. Fear becomes manageable. Resistance becomes impractical. The inmate's first reaction is rarely panic. It's confusion. They ask questions instinctively. Where am I going? How long will this take? Is this permanent? Those questions often receive no answer. Silence is not disrespect here. It is strategy. By refusing to engage, the system avoids creating a psychological anchor. Any information, even bad news, gives the mind something to hold on to. Silence gives it nothing. Restraints are applied methodically. Hands secured, waist chain locked, leg irons fastened. Each step reduces mobility, but more importantly, it sends a message. You are no longer stationary. You are no longer in control of position. Movement now belongs to the system. This is the moment many inmates realize something fundamental has shifted. On death row, confinement is static. Movement is rare. The cell becomes the entire world. When movement suddenly occurs without explanation, it disrupts that psychological equilibrium. The familiar, even if brutal, has been replaced by uncertainty. For some inmates, this triggers resistance. Not physical resistance, but mental. They attempt to read the environment. They watch the officers' faces. They listen for clues in tone and posture. but the officers are trained to offer none. Transport teams are selected for consistency, not personality. They are instructed to maintain neutral demeanor. No reassurance, no confrontation, no unnecessary speech. Emotion is a liability. As the inmate is escorted out of the unit, something else happens quietly. They pass spaces they haven't seen in years. Corridors, sally ports, security checkpoints. Each transition reinforces the same message. You are leaving the only environment you understand. For inmates who have spent decades on death row, this can be destabilizing. Even extreme confinement creates psychological familiarity over time. The mind adapts to predictability, even when it is cruel. Sudden movement shatters that adaptation. And because no explanation is offered, the mind fills the gaps on its own. Some inmates assume the worst. Execution, permanent relocation, punitive isolation. Others cling to hope. Court developments, medical transfers, temporary movement. The system does not correct either assumption. Hope and fear coexist, and that tension drains mental energy quickly. By the time the inmate reaches the sally port, they're already psychologically fatigued. The body is restrained. The environment is unfamiliar. The future is undefined. This is not an accident. Fatigue reduces resistance. Confusion reduces coordination. Uncertainty reduces defiance. Everything about this phase is designed to make the next phase easier. The transport vehicle waits behind reinforced doors, hidden from view until the last moment. It is intentionally unremarkable. No markings, no identifiers, no obvious sense of direction. The inmate is guided forward. The door closes behind them, and with that, the last remaining point of reference disappears. From this moment on, the inmate no longer knows where they are in relation to anything else. Not the unit, not the facility, not the outside world. They know only that movement has begun. This is the first real loss of control. Not the loss imposed by sentencing, but the loss imposed by action. A sentence confines you. Movement reminds you who owns your position. The ride has not started yet, but psychologically, the transfer is already underway. Because once the order is executed, there is no return to routine. No pause, no clarification, no negotiation. The system does not explain itself because it does not need to. By the time the vehicle moves, the inmate has already learned the lesson the system intended to teach. Control does not require warning. Power does not require explanation. And when movement begins, resistance is no longer an option. This is how every Texas death row transfer truly starts. Not with engines, not with highways, but with silence and a decision made somewhere the inmate will never see. Extraction without warning. Extraction is the moment theory becomes reality. Until now, the death row transfer has existed as paperwork, decisions, and silent authorization. Extraction is where the system physically takes possession of the inmate's body and removes the last illusion of choice. In Texas death row operations, extraction is never improvised. It follows a predetermined sequence refined through decades of correctional practice. Every movement is choreographed, every role assigned before the cell door opens. The inmate does not know this. From inside the cell, extraction appears sudden and overwhelming. The door opens. Multiple officers appear. Commands are issued quickly and without explanation. There is no conversation. The lack of dialogue is deliberate. Conversation humanizes the moment. Humanization introduces unpredictability. The system avoids both. Extraction teams are trained to move with calm precision. Their posture is neutral. Their expressions are controlled. Even their pace is regulated. The goal is not speed, but dominance through certainty. The inmate is instructed to face the wall. Hand are placed behind the back. Any delay is noted, not punished, recorded. Texas correctional policy emphasizes compliance documentation. Every hesitation becomes data. That data informs future classifications, security levels, and movement privileges. The inmate may not realize it, but their behavior in these seconds can follow them for years. Restraints are applied again, even if they were already in place. This redundancy serves two purposes. First, it ensures security. Second, it reinforces hierarchy. The system does not assume restraints are sufficient simply because they exist. It verifies. It tightens. It confirms. At this stage, officers are closer than at any other point on death row. Personal space disappears. The inmate can hear breathing, feel movement, sense presence on all sides. This proximity is unsettling. Death row confinement is defined by distance. Officers are usually separated by doors, glass, or space. Extraction collapses that distance instantly. The inmate's awareness spikes. Heart rate increases. Muscles tense. Thoughts accelerate. The body prepares for conflict, even if none is coming. Extraction teams anticipate this reaction. That is why their movements remain slow and controlled. Fast action invites panic. Calm action absorbs it. The inmate is guided forward. Not pushed. Not dragged. Guided. This distinction matters. Force creates resistance. Guidance creates submission. Even when physical pressure is applied, it is measured. Enough to direct movement. Not enough to provoke struggle. The inmate's feet shuffle forward in leg restraints. Balance is compromised. Walking becomes deliberate and awkward. This vulnerability is intentional. An inmate who cannot move freely cannot react freely. As the cell empties behind them, the inmate experiences a subtle psychological shift. The cell, harsh, isolating, familiar, is gone. Movement has replaced stillness. For inmates who have spent years or decades confined to a single space, this transition is disorienting. The mind struggles to adapt to changing surroundings. Hallways appear longer than expected. Doors open and close in unfamiliar sequences. Nothing is explained. The extraction team communicates internally through brief cues and hand signals. The inmate is not included in this communication. They are present, but not acknowledged. This exclusion reinforces status. The inmate is not a participant. They are an object being moved. As they pass through security checkpoints, additional officers may appear briefly, then disappear. These reinforcements are not for the inmate alone. They exist to secure the environment, ensuring no external variables interfere with movement. Texas death row extractions are designed to be invisible to other inmates whenever possible. Transfers often occur during low-activity periods to reduce observation. Visibility creates narrative. Narrative creates resistance. The system avoids both. For the inmate, this invisibility has an unintended psychological effect. Without witnesses, the moment feels unreal. There's no one to react, no one to observe, no one to remember. The extraction exists only in the inmate's experience, and that isolation amplifies its impact. As the inmate approaches the sally port, the atmosphere shifts. The sally port is a threshold space. It separates interior confinement from exterior movement. Security increases. Doors become heavier. Procedures become more rigid. This is where the system transitions from institutional control to operational control. Inside the sally port, officers verify restraints again. Hands, waist, legs. Every lock is checked. The inmate is positioned precisely. Standing marks on the floor may not be visible, but officers know where the inmate should be placed. Orientation matters. Sightlines matter. Control of space is absolute. The transport vehicle is not visible until the final door opens. This delay is purposeful. Seeing the vehicle too early invites anticipation. Anticipation invites emotional response. The system prefers neutrality. When the vehicle comes into view, it rarely looks dramatic. No flashing lights, no markings, no indication of destination. Its anonymity is part of its power. The inmate is guided forward again. At this moment, questions often return. Where am I going? How long is this? Is this permanent? These questions may go unanswered, not out of cruelty, but because answers are not required for compliance. The inmate is positioned at the vehicle's entry point. Steps are counted. Angles are adjusted. Head position is controlled. The extraction team ensures the inmate enters the vehicle in a way that minimizes risk and maintains authority. Once inside, the restraints remain. Sometimes they are reinforced further. Additional seat restraints, partition barriers, limited visibility. The door closes. The sound is final, not loud but absolute. At this point, extraction is complete. The inmate has been removed from death row housing, restrained, isolated, and placed into a mobile containment environment. But psychologically, the extraction's impact continues. The inmate now understands something with clarity. They were not consulted. They were not prepared. They were not informed. The system did not need their understanding. It needed only their compliance. This realization reshapes perception. If movement can occur without warning, then safety is an illusion. Routine is fragile. Stability exists only at the system's discretion. For death row inmates, this knowledge carries particular weight. They already live with the awareness of execution. Extraction adds another layer of unpredictability. It reinforces that even within confinement, control is conditional. Nothing is guaranteed. Not location, not duration, not expectation. As the vehicle prepares to move, the inmate's world contracts further. Vision is restricted. Movement is limited. Information is non-existent. The ride has not begun, but psychologically, the inmate is already in transit. They're no longer anchored to place. They are suspended between known confinement and unknown destination. This suspension is not a byproduct. It is the design. Because once extraction has occurred, resistance becomes meaningless. The inmate has been removed from familiarity, stripped of orientation, and placed into motion. The system now controls not just where they are, but where they will be. And that knowledge settles in quietly. Not with fear, not with panic, but with resignation. By the time the vehicle engine starts, the inmate has already learned the central truth of Texas death row transport. The most powerful part of the ride is not the distance traveled. It is the moment you realize you were never meant to know it was coming. Inside the ride, once the vehicle begins to move, the transfer enters its most controlled phase. This is the part of the process the inmate will remember most clearly. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is sustained. Unlike extraction, which is brief and intense, the ride is prolonged. Minutes stretch into hours. Motion replaces stillness. And with that motion comes a different kind of psychological pressure. Inside a Texas death row transport vehicle, the inmate's environment is deliberately restricted. Visibility is limited. Windows, if present at all, are small, reinforced, and positioned in a way that prevents orientation. The inmate cannot track landmarks. They cannot tell which direction they are traveling. Even light behaves differently inside the vehicle, filtered through barriers that flatten contrast and remove depth. This is not accidental. Orientation gives the mind something to work with. It allows a person to measure progress, anticipate arrival, and maintain a sense of position in the world. By removing orientation, the system turns movement into abstraction. The inmate knows they are moving, but not where, not how far, and not for how long. Restraints remain fully engaged throughout the ride. Hands secured, waist chain locked, leg restraints limiting movement. In some cases, additional restraints are applied to secure the inmate to a fixed position. This prevents shifting, leaning, or adjusting posture freely. Even minor movements require effort. Physical discomfort is not the goal, but it is accepted as a byproduct. Discomfort keeps the inmate aware of restraint. Awareness reinforces hierarchy. The vehicle's interior is quiet, not silent, but controlled. Engine noise is present, steady and constant. Road vibrations pass through the structure, but they are muted. Conversations between officers are minimal and often unintelligible to the inmate. This lack of auditory information creates a strange effect. The inmate becomes hyper-aware of internal sensations. Breathing, heartbeat, muscle tension. Without external reference points, the mind turns inward. Thoughts begin to loop. Questions repeat without resolution. Where am I being taken? Is this temporary? What happens when a vehicle stops? The system does not provide answers, and unanswered questions consume mental energy quickly. As time passes, the inmate's sense of duration begins to distort. Without visual cues or changes in environment, the mind struggles to estimate time accurately. A 10-minute stretch can feel endless. An hour can pass unnoticed. This distortion is intensified by stress. Stress alters time perception, compressing or expanding it unpredictably. Combined with restraint and uncertainty, it creates a mental state where the present moment feels suspended. The ride becomes its own world. There is no past. The cell is gone. There is no future. The destination is unknown. There's only motion. Officers inside the vehicle maintain discipline through consistency. Their behavior does not change based on distance traveled or time elapsed. This consistency sends a clear signal. The ride is not a negotiation. It is a procedure. Occasionally, the vehicle slows or stops. Traffic, checkpoints, route adjustments. Each pause introduces a spike of anticipation in the inmate's mind. Is this the destination? Is something wrong? But the vehicle always moves again. These false pauses wear down expectation. Over time, the inmate stops reacting emotionally to them. Anticipation becomes pointless. The mind conserves energy by flattening response. This is another layer of control. Texas death row transport routes are planned in advance, often with contingencies built in. Alternative roads, backup destinations, coordinated communication with receiving facilities. The inmate is never informed of these details. From a perspective, movement appears aimless. This perceived aimlessness amplifies vulnerability. A person who does not know where they are going cannot prepare themselves mentally. They cannot imagine the end point. They cannot measure how much endurance remains. Endurance without a visible end is far more taxing than hardship with a known duration. As the ride continues, physical sensations begin to intrude. Leg restraints limit circulation. Muscles stiffen from immobility. The body aches in subtle, accumulating ways. These sensations do not overwhelm the inmate, but they remind them constantly that movement is occurring without their participation. They are being carried, not traveling. This distinction matters. Travel implies agency. Being carried implies submission. At some point during the ride, many inmates experience a psychological shift. The questions slow down, not because they are answered, but because asking them feels useless. Thoughts become shorter. Emotions flatten. The mind enters a holding pattern. This is not calm. It is containment. The system has extended the logic of the cell into motion. Even while moving, the inmate is functionally isolated. There is no interaction, no feedback, no engagement. Isolation does not end when the cell door opens. It follows. In some transfers, the ride lasts only a few hours. In others, it can extend far longer due to distance, security considerations, or operational delays. The inmate cannot tell the difference. Without clocks or reference points, duration loses meaning. The body remains restrained. The environment remains unchanged. The future remains undefined. This sameness inside motion is psychologically exhausting. Humans rely on change to regulate stress. Even negative change provides information. When nothing changes, stress accumulates without release. The ride becomes less about fear and more about endurance. Can the mind remain alert? Can the body tolerate immobility? Can uncertainty be carried indefinitely? For death row inmates, these questions are especially heavy. They already exist under the shadow of an ultimate endpoint. The ride adds another layer of unpredictability. It reinforces that control can be exerted at any time, in any direction, without explanation. That realization reshapes how confinement is understood. The prison is no longer a fixed place. It is a system that can move you. As the vehicle nears its destination, though the inmate cannot know this, preparations begin quietly. Officers communicate. Routes are adjusted. Receiving facilities are notified. The inmate remains unaware. When a vehicle finally slows for the last time, the mind reacts cautiously. Experience has taught it not to assume meaning. The engine idles. Doors remain closed. Restraints stay in place. The inmate waits. This waiting is different from waiting in the cell. In the cell, waiting is static. Here, waiting follows motion. The body expects change. The mind braces for transition. When the door eventually opens, light enters differently than before. The environment outside the vehicle feels foreign, even if it is another prison. The inmate has been psychologically softened by the ride, fatigued by uncertainty, drained by restraint, detached by repetition. This is not an accident. The ride is designed to deliver the inmate in a compliant state. Not broken, not panicked, but reduced. Reduced expectations, reduced resistance, reduced emotional volatility. By the time the inmate steps out of the vehicle, the transfer has already achieved its purpose. Movement has reinforced hierarchy. The system has demonstrated that it controls not only confinement, but transition, and that lesson lingers. Long after the restraints are adjusted, long after the vehicle is secured, long after the ride itself ends. Because once an inmate understands that movement can occur without warning, without explanation, and without orientation, the idea of stability disappears. And without stability, control no longer needs to be enforced. It is assumed. Arrival and verification. Arrival is not the end of the transfer. It is the moment when uncertainty briefly spikes again. After hours of motion without orientation, the vehicle slows and stops in a space the inmate cannot immediately understand. The engine cuts. Silence replaces vibration. For the first time since extraction, the body is still, but the restraints remain tight and the environment is unfamiliar. This pause matters. In Texas death row operations, arrival is deliberately slowed. The system does not rush the final stage because haste invites error. Every transfer must end with confirmation, documentation, and verification. The inmate's presence must be accounted for in precise detail. From the inmate's perspective, this delay feels unnerving. They expect something to happen, but nothing does. Doors remain closed. Restraints stay locked. Commands do not come immediately. This waiting reactivates anxiety. The mind, already fatigued by the ride, searches for meaning in the stillness. It tries to determine whether this is temporary, whether something has gone wrong, or whether the destination is worse than anticipated. The system does not clarify. When the doors finally open, the inmate does not step out freely. They are received. Officers from the receiving facility take control while transport officers maintain custody. This overlap ensures continuity of authority. There is never a moment where control is ambiguous. Names are exchanged. Documentation is reviewed. Identification numbers are confirmed. The inmate stands restrained between two systems, neither of which engages them directly. They are present, but peripheral. Verification is meticulous. Fingerprints may be checked. Photographs reviewed. Medical status confirmed. These procedures are not symbolic. They're safeguards. Any discrepancy can halt intake until resolved. The system prioritizes certainty over speed. For the inmate, this process reinforces a sobering reality. They are not being welcomed. They're being processed. Every movement is directed. Step forward. Turn. Stop. The language is minimal. Tone remains neutral. Officers are trained to avoid escalation, reassurance, or commentary. Emotional distance preserves control. As restraints are adjusted or replaced, the inmate experiences a brief physical shift, but not relief. Restraints may be loosened in one area and tightened in another. Temporary freedom is not granted. Control is simply redistributed. The environment feels different from the transport vehicle, but not safer. Lighting is brighter. Sounds are clearer. The space feels larger. But with that clarity comes exposure. Unlike the cell or vehicle, arrival areas involve multiple officers, cameras, and checkpoints. The inmate becomes acutely aware of being observed. Observation replaces isolation. This transition has psychological consequences. Isolation suppresses emotional response. Observation activates self-awareness. The inmate becomes conscious of posture, expression, and movement. They attempt to appear compliant, calm, unthreatening, even if anxiety remains high. This self-monitoring consumes mental energy. Texas death row arrival procedures are structured to minimize uncertainty for staff, not for inmates. The system is focused on accountability, not comfort. Once verification is complete, the inmate is escorted deeper into the facility. This movement is slower than extraction, but no less controlled. Corridors differ in layout. Doors differ in sound. Smells and temperature change subtly. These differences signal permanence. The ride was transitional. This space is not. At this stage, some inmates begin to realize the transfer is not temporary. This realization does not always come with panic. Often, it arrives as heaviness. The body reacts first. Shoulders slump. Breathing slows. The mind recalibrates. Whatever expectations existed during the ride, hope, fear, speculation begin to fade. The destination is no longer abstract. It is immediate and unavoidable. Housing assignment follows. The inmate is guided toward a new cell, sometimes without explanation, sometimes with minimal instruction. The criteria for placement may include security level, availability, or operational necessity. The inmate is not informed of these factors. The door opens. The cell interior is revealed. Even if it resembles the previous cell, the differences stand out sharply. Angles feel unfamiliar. Sounds behave differently. Light enters at a new angle. Familiar confinement has been replaced with unfamiliar confinement. This transition carries weight. The human mind adapts to predictability, even when conditions are extreme. A sudden shift resets that adaptation. The inmate must now relearn the environment from scratch. The door closes. Again, this time, the sound carries new meaning. The ride is over, but control has not lessened. If anything, it has been reinforced. Arrival procedures do not include orientation. No one explains routines, schedules, or expectations immediately. The inmate is left to observe and infer. This mirrors the logic of extraction. Information is withheld to prevent mental preparation. For some inmates, this is the most destabilizing moment of the entire transfer. The ride was exhausting but active. Arrival is passive. The mind has time to process, and processing brings clarity. The clarity is uncomfortable. They were moved without warning, transported without explanation, delivered without negotiation. Nothing about the process required their consent or understanding. The system operated smoothly without it. That realization settles in slowly. Texas death row transfers are not designed to terrorize. They are designed to function. And functioning systems do not pause to explain themselves. By the end of arrival, the inmate understands something fundamental. The prison they came from was not unique. The one they have entered is not an exception. They're not being punished by a place. They're being managed by a system that moves people quietly, efficiently, and without warning, and expects compliance as a default state. The arrival confirms what the ride already suggested. Control does not end at the cell door. It follows you. And once the system has demonstrated that it can relocate you at will, the concept of stability disappears. The inmate is left alone in a new cell, surrounded by unfamiliar silence. The transfer is complete, but psychologically, its effects are only beginning. After the move, once the cell door closes at the new facility, the transfer officially ends. But for the inmate, the most consequential phase has just begun. The body is no longer in motion. The restraints have been adjusted or partially removed. The noise of transport, the tension of extraction, and the uncertainty of the ride are over. What remains is stillness, and with it, space for the mind to process what has happened. This processing is unavoidable. During extraction and transport, the mind operates defensively. It narrows focus, conserves energy, and suppresses emotion to survive uncertainty. After arrival, those defenses loosen. Thoughts return, slowly, unevenly, and with them comes a deeper realization. The system moved without explanation. It did not need permission. It did not offer reassurance. That knowledge reshapes how confinement is understood. In the original death row cell, confinement was static, predictable. The inmate learned its rhythms, its sounds, its limits. Over time, even extreme restriction developed a form of psychological familiarity. The cell became hostile, but known. The transfer breaks that familiarity permanently. The inmate now understands that no environment, no matter how established, is stable. Movement can happen at any time, without warning, without justification that needs to be understood. This awareness lingers. In the hours after arrival, many inmates remain hyper-aware. They listen closely to unfamiliar sounds. They observe lighting patterns. They test routines quietly, try to learn how this new space behaves. But the mind does not approach this learning with curiosity. It approaches with caution. Every sound feels provisional. Every routine feels temporary. Every expectation feels risky. The inmate has learned that anticipation leads to disappointment. The safest posture is neutrality. Emotionally, this period is marked by flattening. Not numbness yet, but restraint. Hope is muted. Fear is controlled. Anger is delayed. The inmate avoids emotional investment because investment assumes continuity. The transfer demonstrated that continuity is conditional. For some inmates, this leads to withdrawal. They limit movement. They speak less during interactions. They conserve emotional energy. This behavior is often misinterpreted as adjustment. From an administrative standpoint, the inmate appears compliant. There are no incidents, no resistance, no visible distress. But internally, a shift is underway. The inmate has recalibrated their understanding of power. Before the transfer, power was abstract. It existed in policies, sentences, and routines. After the transfer, power has proven itself physical and immediate. It can relocate a person's entire world in a single moment. That lesson reinforces submission, not through fear, but through inevitability. In the days that follow, sleep patterns often destabilize again, not from environmental factors alone, but from cognitive replay. The mind revisits moments from the transfer. The door opening, the restraints clicking shut, the vehicle stopping unexpectedly, the final door closing. These memories replay without clear emotional markers. They are not nightmares. They are fragments. The brain attempts to integrate the experience into a coherent narrative and struggles. When an experience lacks explanation, the mind cannot easily categorize it. That ambiguity keeps the memory active. This is why transfers often have longer psychological impact than daily confinement. Confinement is constant. Transfers are disruptive. Disruption forces adaptation. Over time, the inmate begins to modify behavior accordingly. They stop assuming permanence. They stop forming long-term mental anchors. They limit attachment to place. This psychological mobility mirrors the physical mobility imposed by the system. If the body can be moved at any time, the mind learns not to settle. This adaptation is efficient. It reduces emotional shock during future disruptions. It lowers resistance. It stabilizes behavior, but comes at a cost. A person who no longer expects stability cannot fully engage with the present. They exist in a suspended state, always prepared for removal. This readiness becomes part of identity. The inmate is no longer defined by where they are, but by the knowledge that where there does not matter. That realization can be corrosive. Identity requires continuity. Continuity requires predictability. When predictability disappears, identity weakens. In conversations with staff, inmates may appear indifferent. Questions are answered minimally. Requests are rare. Complaints decrease. This does not always signal acceptance. Often, it signals disengagement. Disengagement is a rational response to an environment where agency has proven ineffective. Why ask questions when answers are not required? Why plan when plans can be erased? Why invest emotionally when stability is provisional? The system benefits from this disengagement. A disengaged inmate is easier to manage, less reactive, less demanding, less resistant. This outcome is not incidental. Texas death row transfers are designed to preserve order, minimize risk, and maintain authority. Psychological consequences are not always the primary objective, but they are acknowledged, documented, and accepted. From a systems perspective, the transfer succeeded. The inmate was moved safely. No incidents occurred. Protocols were followed. From the inmate's perspective, something less visible occurred. Their understanding of control changed. Control is no longer associated with walls or doors. It is associated with unpredictability. The system does not need to threaten movement again. The memory of it is sufficient. This memory alters future behavior more effectively than discipline ever could. The inmate learns to exist without expectations. This is not peace. It is containment of thought. Over weeks and months, the effects of a transfer blend into daily confinement. The environment becomes familiar again, but the sense of fragility remains. Any unusual sound, any unexpected interaction, any deviation from routine, each one carries the echo of the transfer. It could happen again. That awareness does not fade easily. Even inmates who experience multiple transfers rarely adapt fully. Each movement reinforces the same lesson. Place is irrelevant, control is absolute, and explanation is optional. This realization does not produce chaos. It produces compliance. But compliance born of inevitability is not the same as rehabilitation, stability, or psychological health. It is functional, and functionality is often mistaken for success. In the end, the transfer leaves behind no visible scars. There are no records of emotional impact, no logs of psychological shifts, no documentation of altered identity. What remains exists entirely inside the inmate. A quieter mind, lower expectations, reduced attachment. The ride is over, but its message persists. That message is simple, and it is learned without words. You are not stationary. You are not informed. You are not in control. And once that lesson is internalized, the system no longer needs to move you to demonstrate power. The possibility alone is enough. The power of movement. Texas death row transport is rarely discussed because it does not look dramatic. There are no public announcements, no visible confrontations, no moments designed for attention. And yet, few procedures inside the prison system carry as much psychological weight. This documentary was not about a single ride, a single route, or a single inmate. It was about a method, one that uses movement itself as a tool of control. The extraction removes certainty. The ride removes orientation. The arrival removes stability. Together, they deliver a message more powerful than force. That message is simple. Control does not depend on walls. A cell may feel permanent. A routine may feel fixed. But the system does not need to change conditions to reassert power. It only needs to remind the inmate that everything can be altered without warning. Movement becomes the punishment that doesn't look like punishment. It leaves no marks, creates no headlines, triggers no alarms. Yet it reshapes behavior long after the transfer ends. An inmate who has been moved without explanation learns not to expect answers. An inmate who has been relocated without warning learns not to rely on routine. An inmate who understands this no longer needs to be reminded who is in control. From the outside, the process appears efficient. From the inside, it is transformative. This is how modern correctional systems maintain authority, not through constant force, but through quiet demonstrations of power that require no repetition. Once the lesson is learned, the system does not need to act again. The possibility is enough. And that is what makes death row transport one of the most effective and least visible tools inside the American prison system. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.